Today I'm going to discuss the most important chapter is all about the BA program English honor students who have the elective subjects of discipline English. Indian classic literature. Indian classical literature is a part of your course. Those students who are saying English honors, BA English honors subject. In this paragraph, I am going to discuss about the Indian classical literature, refer to the literature produced on the Indian subcontinent until 1947 and in the Republic of India thereafter. The Republic of India has the 22 official recognized language. So, in this period, um, we have a 22 recognized, यानी कि official recognized languages we have in the period of Republic time and classical literature. The earliest work of Indian literature were orally transmitted Sanskrit literature begin with the oral literature of Rigveda. So earliest work जो था Indian classical literature का वो begin हुआ था with the Sanskrit literature से with the oral literature of Rigveda. The Sanskrit epics Ramayana and the Maharashtra were subsequently codified and appeared towards the end of the second millennium BCE. So the Sanskrit epics Ramayana and Mahabharata, Maharashtra were subsequently codified and appeared toward the end of the second millennium BCE. So this was the period when the Sanskrit epics Ramayana and the Mahabharata were subsequently codified. Classical Sanskrit literature developed rapidly during the first few millennium BCE. For example, Pali Canon and Tamil and Sangam literature. Classical literature, Sanskrit literature developed rapidly. संस्कृत लिटरेचर जो है क्लासिकल की डेवलप्ड हुई थी rapidly during the first few millennium BCE. For example, Pali Canon and the Tamil Sangam literature. In the medieval period, literature in the Kannada and the Telugu appeared in the 6th and the 11th century respectively. In the medieval period, literature in the Kannada and Telugu appeared in the 6th and 11th century respectively. For example, early works written in the Vedic Sanskrit included the core Vedas and the Upanishads, and other examples included the Salva Sutra, which are some of the earliest texts on the geometry. For example, of early works written in the Vedic Sanskrit included the core Vedas and Upanishads, and other examples included the Sulba Sutra, which are some of the earliest texts on geometry. Epic Sanskrit. Ved Vyas Mahabharata and Valmiki Ramayana written in the epic Sanskrit are regarded as the greatest Sanskrit epics. Epic Sanskrit is a part of the Ved Vyas Mahabharata and Valmiki Ramayana, which is a part of the period of the 1947 and the Republic uh, period 1947 and thereafter, which are the part of the classical literature and which is produced in the period of 1947 and thereafter. Ved Vyas Mahabharata and Valmiki Ramayana and written in the epic Sanskrit are regarded as the greatest Sanskrit epics. Classical Sanskrit literature. The famous poet and the playwright Kalidas wrote on the epic Raghuvamsha. It was written in the classical Sanskrit rather than epic Sanskrit. The Law of Manu is a famous text in Hinduism. The classical Sanskrit literature. The famous poet and the playwright Kalidas wrote one epic Raghuvansham. It was written in the classical संस्कृत. ये written हुआ था classic संस्कृत में rather than epic संस्कृत. The Law of Manu is a famous text in the Hinduism. Prakritic literature. The most notable Prakritic language were the Jain Prakritic, Pali, Gandhari, Maharashtri, and Saurasani. So, in this period, the Prakritic literature is also produced in the period of the classical Indian literature of 1947 and thereafter. The Prakritic literature, the most notable Prakritic language were the Jain Prakritic, Pali, Gandhari, Maharashtri, and Sausani. The conclusion. Indian classical literature refer to the literature produced on the Indian subcontinent until the 1947 and in the Republic of India 1947 thereafter. The Republic of India has 22 official recognized language. So, in this paragraph, I have discussed with you how the Indian classical literature um, uh, produced in the period of 1947 and thereafter, and which are the how the earliest um, transmitted products of the Sanskrit Vedas of Maharamayan and Mahabharata, and thereafter the Sanskrit Vedas, and this kind of a um most notable and most notable language we have in the classical Sanskrit literature and the Prakritic literature. So, what is the Indian classical literature? You have to follow the same structure of the answer. First of all, you have to define the definition of Indian classical literature. So, Indian classical literature refer to the literature produced on the Indian subcontinent until the 1947 and in the Republic of India thereafter, and the Republic of India has 22 official recognized language. Next, the earliest work of the Indian literature were orally transmitted. Sanskrit literature began with the oral literature of Rig Vedas. The Sanskrit epics Ramayana and Maharashtra were subsequently codified and appeared toward the end of the second millennium BCE. Classical Sanskrit literature developed rapidly during the first few millennium BCE, for example, Pali Canon and Tamil Sangam literature. In the medieval period, literature in the Kannada and the Telugu appeared in the 6th and 11th century respectively. Examples of early works written in the Vedic Sanskrit included the core Vedas and the Upanishads, and other examples included the Salva Sutra, which are some of the earliest texts of geometry. So, in these paragraphs, I have discussed with you which kind of a languages, which kind of a classical literature is produced, and the language are produced in the period of 1947 and after the Republic thereafter. Epic Sanskrit Vyas, Mahabharata and Valmiki Ramayana, written in the epic Sanskrit, are regarded as the greatest Sanskrit epics. Classical Sanskrit literature. The famous poet and the playwright Kalidas wrote on the epic Raghuvansham, and it was written in the classical Sanskrit rather than the epic Sanskrit. The Law of Manu is a famous text in the Hinduism. So, in this paragraph, I have discussed with you how the famous poet and the playwright Kalidas wrote one epic Raghuvansham, and it was written in the classical Sanskrit rather than the epic Sanskrit. So, it was written in the classical Sanskrit rather than the epic Sanskrit. The Law of Manu is a famous text of Hinduism. The next we have Prakritic literature. The most notable Prakritic language were the Jain Prakritic, Pali, Gandhari, Maharashtri, and the Saurisni. So you have to define all the language and what are the literary devices of this language. If the questions uh, will become in the long answer, 25 marks, so you have to define all the language with their literary parts also. Prakritic language, the most okay, now we have a conclusion. Indian classical literature refer to the literature produced on the Indian subcontinent until 1947 and in the Republic of India thereafter. The Republic of India has 22 official recognized languages. So you have to write your answer in this same structure, and you have to define all the paragraph in a deep manner otherwise you will deduct your marks, and each and every point is very important according to your examination point of views. So learn it and remember it, all the paragraphs, and make your own notes and try to write your in your own language, which is the most important thing. So I hope you like this video, which is very important according to your examination point of views. So Indian classical literature basically is a very lengthy and long part of your course. I have only discussed with you the most important point, which will you have, which have to you define and which have to explain in your answer while you are writing in your examination sheet. You have to write all the points, and you can write in your own language, and you can also add some and elaborate your answer in your own manner. So these are the main point which I have to discuss with you. So this kind of a way you can write and understand your answer and Indian classical literature, all the important points. So I hope you like this video, which is very important. The question will be also come in the same manner, like what is the Indian classical literature and what is the um most important official languages produced in the 1947 period and thereafter the Republic Day. So this question will be also come, and which kind of languages are the earliest work. You have to define all the languages as I have discussed with you. The earliest works are of Indian literature were orally transmitted. Sanskrit and literature began with the older literature of Rig Veda. The Sanskrit epics Ramayana and Maharashtra were subsequently codified and appeared toward the end of the millennium BCE. ठीक है? And the classical Sanskrit literature developed rapidly during the first few millennium BCE. For example, Pali Canon and Tamil Sangam literature. And in the medieval period, literature in the Kannada and the Telugu appeared in the 6th and 11th century respectively. An example of earlier work written in the Vedic Sanskrit including the core Vedas and Upanishad, and other example included the Sulba Sutra, which are the some of the earliest texts on the geometry. And epic Sanskrit, Ved, Vyas, Mahabharata, and the Valmiki Ramayana written in the epic Sanskrit are regarded as the greatest Sanskrit epics. Classical Sanskrit literature. The famous poet and the playwright Kalidas wrote on the epic Raghuvansham. It was written in the classical Sanskrit rather than in epic Sanskrit. The Law of Manu is a famous text in the Hinduism. Prakritic literature. The most notable Prakritic language were the Jain, Prakritic, Pali, Gandhari, Maharashtri, Saonse. So these are the most important languages of the 1947 um, Indian classical literature. You have to define all of them in your answer. You can write your conclusion in your own word. The Indian classical literature refer to the literature produced on the Indian subcontinent and until 1947 and the Republic of India after. Thereafter, the Republic of India has the 22 official recognized languages. So I hope you like this video. Thank you so much.